Serum concentrations rise rapidly. 300 milligrams per 1 milliliter in MCT oil will yield tremendous different serum concentrations compared to 300 milligrams per 1 milliliter in castor oil. Vigorous Steve here. Let's discuss which ester gives you the most bang for your buck per injection of 1 milliliter. We're going to handicap this video a little bit and take the injection depot into consideration because esters with a particularly short half-life and less carbon atoms, resulting in less lipophilicity overall, also are being produced in a lower concentration. So you see that testosterone propionate or testosterone acetate, for example, are being produced in 100 milligrams per 1 milliliter. And even though the actual percentage of testosterone is higher compared to testosterone enanthate or undecanoate, for example, because testosterone enanthate and undecanoate have a higher lipophilicity because they have more carbon atoms contained within the ester, you see that the concentration is higher at 250 milligrams per 1 milliliter. So if you take the overall injection volume into consideration, you get considerably more actual testosterone per 1 milliliter if we go with an ester over a longer half-life because it has a higher lipophilicity. So we'll take all of that into consideration in this video and give you guys insight into the most bang for your buck compound or ester that you can choose to go with in the future. So let's say you want to go with 1,000 milligrams of actual testosterone, for example, testosterone with an ester attached. So 1,000 milligrams of active pharmaceutical ingredient being the testosterone. If you were to go with an ester of a shorter half-life, less lipophilicity and an overall lower concentration, you might need to administer 12 milliliters of pharmaceuticals to get 1,000 milligrams of actual testosterone. But if you chose to go with an ester with a longer half-life and a higher concentration and a higher lipophilicity, you might only need 5.5 milliliters. And we always have to keep that into consideration because you don't want to end up with lumps and bumps and scar tissue and inflammation and muscles that aren't really muscles but are spiked with a tremendous amount of oil because that takes away from your physique. So we always have to keep the injection volume into consideration, and we're going to discuss all of that in this video. So the way I deducted the percentage of actual testosterone compared to testosterone plus an ester attachment is by molar mass, the molecular weight, which isn't entirely accurate because there might be a little bit of a discrepancy based on one hydrogen atom, which has a molar mass of about 1. Now, considering that testosterone has a molar mass of about 288.431, I believe, and esters with a particularly long half-life and a lot of carbon atoms might even have a molar mass of 400 or 450. So I calculated the difference between the active pharmaceutical ingredient and the ester formulation, resulting in a percentage of testosterone to ester or nandrolone to ester or percentage of trembolone or primobolan or masterone compared to the ester formulation that are contained within. And then measure that against the concentration so you know how many milligrams of testosterone you're actually injecting when you're taking a milliliter of test prop or test enanthate, test cypionate, right? We'll discuss that all in this video. Again, there might be a little bit of a discrepancy of one hydrogen atom resulting in maybe tipping the needle between 0.1% in either direction. So it might be 0.1% less of active pharmaceutical ingredient or 0.1% more of active pharmaceutical ingredient. It's probably still the most comprehensive and complete list that you'll find anywhere on the internet. Now, over the last few days, I've done a lot of research figuring out what the actual active pharmaceutical ingredient is, in particular ester formulations. But certain websites say completely opposing things to other websites. And it's commonly not mentioned on the product insert of a pharmaceutical. So I just had to go with the molecular weight and the differences between the raw anabolic androgenic steroid and the anabolic androgenic steroid with an ester attachment. Might be a little bit inaccurate, but at least it's consistently inaccurate. So let's start with testosterone suspension, which is 100% active pharmaceutical ingredient. Concentrations might be 50 milligrams per 1 milliliter or 100 milligrams per 1 milliliter of a water-based injection. Again, there's no ester attached. So testosterone by itself, testosterone suspension is not very lipophilic, and that's why they dissolve it in water. Now, it's also a little bit hydrophobic, so it doesn't really dissolve well in water as well. That's why the concentrations are generally 50 milligrams per 1 milliliter or even 25 milligrams per 1 milliliter. Do your due diligence before you decide to go with 100% active pharmaceutical ingredient with no ester attachment, because the inflammation and the post-injection pain and the risk for infection or the risk for systemic inflammation is tremendous. Really only use if you're very, very experienced. So let's start with the acetate ester. Testosterone acetate is 87.3% testosterone, meaning that 100 milligrams per 1 milliliter of testosterone acetate will only give you 83.3 milligrams of testosterone. So let's you go with trenbolone acetate with a slightly lower molar mass compared to testosterone. 100 milligrams per 1 milliliter will yield 86.5% trenbolone or 86.5 milligrams of actual trenbolone in that 1 milliliter of injection. And if you go with primobolan acetate, which are found in tablets, if you take 25 milligrams of primobolan acetate tablets, you only get 21.9 milligrams of actual primobolan, because primobolan acetate is 87.8% primobolan, if you don't account for the acetate ester, which is attached. Now, when we look at testosterone propionate, you see that it contains 83.7% actual testosterone. So that means a 100 milligram per 1 milliliter formulation of testosterone propionate will yield 83.7 milligrams of actual testosterone. Drostanolone propionate, masterone, with a little bit higher molecular weight, yields 84.4% drostanolone. That means 100 milligrams per 1 milliliter drostanolone propionate formulation gives you 84.4 milligrams of actual drostanolone. Sustanon 250 also contains testosterone propionate, albeit in lower amounts, only 30 milligrams in its overall 4-ester formulation. Sustanon 250 was designed to give you very stable serum concentrations of testosterone in a single administration per week. So 4 different esters were chosen based on its half-life and its overlap of the half-lives, allowing for very stable serum concentrations after a single administration. Sustanon 250 contains 30 milligrams of testosterone propionate, which accounts for 25.1 milligrams of actual testosterone. At the end of this video, we'll discuss the total of testosterone which is contained in Sustanon 250 after we've gone all through the particular esters that Sustanon 250 contains. Sustanon 250 also contains 60 milligrams of testosterone isocaproate, which contains approximately 74.6% testosterone. So that means that 60 milligrams testosterone isocaproate in Sustanon 250 contributes 44.7 milligrams of actual testosterone. Testosterone enanthate will yield about 72% actual testosterone. So that means a formulation containing 250 milligrams per 1 milliliter testosterone enanthate will yield 180 milligrams of actual testosterone. Now, let's also discuss primobolan enanthate, methanolone enanthate, one of my favorite compounds to run alongside testosterone. Methanolone enanthate is 72.9% methanolone or primobolan. That means 100 milligrams per 1 milliliter primobolan, rimobolan, for example. Bayer rimobolan, the best methanolone enanthate you can probably purchase, given that it's legitimate and not counterfeit. 100 milligrams per 1 milliliter methanolone enanthate will yield 72.9 milligrams methanolone. Drostanolone enanthate will yield 73.1% drostanolone. But a 200 milligram per 1 milliliter drostanolone formulation, drostanolone enanthate formulation, will yield 146.2 milligrams actual drostanolone. So if you are limited to injection volume, you would have to choose drostanolone enanthate over drostanolone propionate, because drostanolone propionate will give you 84.4 milligrams per 1 milliliter, but drostanolone enanthate will give you 146 0.2 milligrams Drostanolone per 1 milliliter, right? So the injection volume always contributes. And if you want to keep the injection volume low, especially comparing testosterone enanthate to testosterone propionate or drostanolone propionate to drostanolone enanthate, right? If you have to keep the injection volume into consideration, you would always go with enanthate because the increased lipophilicity increased for a higher concentration per milliliter, yielding more active pharmaceutical ingredient. Now, some guys prefer testosterone cypionate because their esterases seem to favor the cypionate ester. Again, individual response also contributes which particular testosterone or steroid ester you prefer to use, because the esterases tend to prefer different kinds of esters, right? The esterases are the ones that metabolize and cleave the esters one carbon atom at a time. And if you have genetic polymorphisms that produce esterases that seem to favor cypionate esters, you go with cypionate. And if you have esterases that seem to favor enanthate esters, like in my case, enanthate always sits well with me, gets me very stable serum concentrations, and never, ever, ever, ever any post-injection pain. My esterases like enanthate, and maybe your esterases like cypionate. If you like cypionate, testosterone cypionate will yield 69.9% actual testosterone. Which if you really want to nitpick, that's 2.1% less compared to testosterone enanthate, which is 72% testosterone. So a formulation of 200 milligrams per 1 milliliter testosterone cypionate will yield 139.8 milligrams of testosterone. But 1 milliliter of testosterone enanthate yields 180 milligrams. 40 milligrams per 1 milliliter more. That's a big difference. Now, if you were to increase your testosterone cypionate to, 1.25 milliliters or 250 milligrams of testosterone cypionate, you would still get 5.25 milligrams more testosterone if you go with testosterone enanthate at 250 milligrams. Again, I like enanthate, guys. I'm trying to find reasons to convince you to move to enanthate as well. But if you like cypionate, that's totally fine with me. You do what's best for you. Now, there's also boldenone cypionate or dihydroboldenone cypionate. I did not calculate the percentage for dihydroboldenone because I could not find the molecular mass for dihydroboldenone. And I didn't want to go through the calculations comparing boldenone to testosterone and then calculating dihydrotestosterone to dihydroboldenone and then calculating that to the cypionate or undecanoate ester. So, either way, it's pretty close. Boldenone has a very comparable molecular mass to testosterone. So you see that boldenone cypionate contains 69.8% boldenone, meaning that 200 milligrams per 1 milliliter, that's generally the formulations of boldenone cypionate on the underground lab scene. There's no pharmaceutical or veterinary grade boldenone cypionate. 200 milligrams per 1 milliliter boldenone cypionate will yield 139.5 milligrams actual boldenone. And in my research, I also found that there used to be a proviron cypionate, a mestrolone cypionate, which was formulated against depression, but never got into development or marketing, was never used. So maybe somebody with an underground lab or access to raws for the guys that like their proviron and would like to potentiate a little bit less liver stress. Apparently there was a mestrolone cypionate formulated against depression, which I can see because, generally speaking, sexual binding globulin within the reference range should give you a little bit better sense of well-being or libido sex drive compared to having very high sexual binding globulin levels. So again, there might be some practical applications for it, and bypassing liver metabolization, comparing that to oral administration. Testosterone phenylpropionate, another compound found in Sustanon 250 and not really being formulated by itself. Sustanon 250 contains 60 milligrams of testosterone phenylpropionate, which is 68.6% actual testosterone. So that means that 60 milligrams test phenylpropionate contains 41.1 milligrams actual testosterone in the Sustanon 250 formulations. And there's also nandrolone phenylpropionate, which is being produced by itself. Nandrolone phenylpropionate contains 67.5% nandrolone. In 100 milligram per 1 milliliter formulation, you would get 67.5 milligrams actual nandrolone. But I've also seen on the underground scene 200 milligram per 1 milliliter formulation of nandrolone phenylpropionate. And that would yield 135 milligrams of actual nandrolone, which is very comparable to 250 milligrams of nandrolone decanoate. And while we're on the subject of decanoate, testosterone decanoate contains 65.2% actual testosterone, also being used in Sustanon 250 at 100 milligrams as part of that 250 milligram of 4 different ester formulations. 100 milligrams of testosterone decanoate in Sustanon 250 contributes 65.2 milligrams actual testosterone. Now, nandrolone decanoate, 64% actual nandrolone. That means 100 milligrams per 1 milliliter is only 64 milligrams actual nandrolone in a nandrolone decanoate formulation. And of course, the underground scenes also has 250 milligrams per 1 milliliter nandrolone decanoate. And that would give you 160 milligrams actual nandrolone, which is very close to 1 milliliter of nandrolone phenylpropionate dosed at 200 milligrams per 1 milliliter. Now, Nebido, if we would go by administration volume, one administration of Nebido would be 4 milliliters every 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, depending on how generous your hormone replacement therapy prescriber is. In most cases, it's one administration every 12 weeks, which leads to a tremendous amount of estrogen surge in the first week. But if you can somehow space out your Nebido, it might actually be beneficial. Testosterone Undecanoate contains 63.2% actual testosterone. That means 250 milligrams per 1 milliliter of Nebido contains 157.5 milligrams testosterone. But if you go with the full injection dose, if you go with 4 milliliters, that's 1,000 milligrams testosterone decanoate, that will give you 631.5 milligrams, 631.5 milligrams testosterone in one go. Again, I would advise everybody to space your Nebido injections at least once a week, but preferably bi-weekly or maybe even every day if you like to go with micro-administrations and keep your serum concentrations as stable as possible. So everything combined, the 4 different esters contained within 2 Sustanon 250 will yield you, per 250 milligrams per 1 milliliter, will yield you 176.1 milligrams actual testosterone. So that's very comparable to 250 milligrams of testosterone enanthate, which will still give you 3.9 milligrams more testosterone per 1 milliliter. Boldenone Undecylonate contains 63.3% actual boldenone. And even though the concentrations of equipoise, boldenone and undecylonate, are generally the highest at 300 milligrams per 1 milliliter, considering it's such a low percentage of actual boldenone, 300 milligrams per 1 milliliter of equipoise will yield 189.9 milligrams boldenone. Very close to testosterone enanthate when you compare the actual active pharmaceutical ingredient between those two pharmaceuticals. And don't forget about parabolan. Trenbolone hexahydrobenzylcarbonate is 65.9% trenbolone. And this is the only formula on this list which was specifically designed to yield a round number of active pharmaceutical ingredients. Those old parabolan amps were 76 milligrams per 1.5 milliliters, yielding exactly 50 milligrams of trenbolone. Now, if you go with trenbolone acetate, you get a higher percentage of trenbolone, and it would also yield a much more trenbolone per 1 milliliter. So those old parabolan amps are a little bit redundant, especially considering that trenbolone or the parabolan used to be produced in arachids oil, which I'm not really for. Trenbolone causes inflammation, and arachids oil causes inflammation, and the prostaglandins causes inflammation, and the Trenkov causes, well, you know where I'm going. I mentioned that in the trenbolone video. I'll link it up here. Still, very nice formula. So when we compare all of this information, and we want to go with the highest concentration per 1 milliliter, boldenone wins. You would get 189.9, let's say 190 milligrams of active pharmaceutical ingredients per 1 milliliter of injection, right? 1 milliliter injection is the handicapped. And parabolin would give you the least. It will only give you 50 milligrams of active pharmaceutical ingredient. So I'll list that right here on the side so you can see a complete overview of how many milligrams active pharmaceutical ingredient you're going to get depending on which compound and ester formulation you're going to inject. Now also keep in mind that products with a relatively high amount of active pharmaceutical ingredient per 1 milliliter of product also need to be produced in carrier oils with a higher dynamic viscosity rating, because it takes longer for the lipases to metabolize the fat away, allowing for the anabolic androgenic steroid and the ester to be subject to esterases and then raise serum concentrations as the esterases cleave off the esters. So if you put boldenone undecanoate, equipoise, in MCT oil at 300 milligrams per 1 milliliter, considering that MCT oil is rapidly absorbed and disperses rapidly, increasing the overall surface of the injection depot, serum concentrations rise rapidly. 300 milligrams per 1 milliliter in MCT oil will yield tremendous different serum concentrations compared to 300 milligrams per 1 milliliter in castor oil. So you have to keep the dynamic viscosity rating of the particular carrier oil that these pharmaceuticals are suspended in into consideration, and the amount of active pharmaceutical ingredient which is contained within these kinds of formulations. That all contributes to how your body is going to respond. So particular products and particular genetic polymorphisms and favors or produces particular esterases might favor testosterone enanthate at a particular concentration in a particular carrier oil. And that might work for me and a couple of my clients, but it might not work for all of my clients. Maybe they like testosterone cypionate in sesame oil with a little bit lower dynamic viscosity rating, with a lower injection frequency, perhaps subcutaneous, right? There's so many variables that you can manipulate when you decide to go with pharmaceuticals, but it's just an indication of decisions that you're going to have to make when you go forward with this hormone journey. Certain esters will yield more active pharmaceutical ingredient. And keep in mind that more active pharmaceutical ingredient might not always be a good thing, unless the dynamic viscosity rating of the carrier oil is higher, allowing all this active pharmaceutical ingredient to stay in the injection depot. Because the injection depot and the way your body metabolizes this injection depot ultimately decides how your serum concentrations are going to meet. So if you have 100 milligrams per 1 milliliter testosterone propionate in MCT oil, I would do daily administrations, ideally subcutaneous, to even prolong the absorption rate, because it takes a little bit longer for the injection depot to be metabolized with lipases and esterases in the subcutaneous depot over the intramuscular depot. And if you go with testosterone enanthate, you might get away with a single administration if that testosterone enanthate is 250 milligrams per 1 milliliter in castor oil injected intramuscularly, right? Blood work will probably tell you more than this video does, how your individual response is going to be to particular compounds. But all those things are meant to be thought of when you decide to choose particular products. Really hope this helps, guys. Hope this gives you a little bit more insight into how much actual anabolic androgenic steroid you're using when you're choosing particular ester formulations or a combination of esters. And in the underground lab scene, there's sometimes, a test complex with 6 different esters. So that makes it almost impossible to calculate how much actual testosterone you're getting. Just be aware that very high concentrations of a propionate or phenylpropionate, and even a decanoate, you get your test 500, for example. That's just a fair warning sign that there's a lot of synthetic solvent contained within, and that product is going to give you tremendous systemic inflammation. Maybe go with a product with a little bit less concentration. You can still get a good bang for your buck with boldenone, undecanoate, or testosterone enanthate. Hope this helps, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're looking for the most comprehensive guides to bodybuilding pharmacology, you can find the ebooks on my website, vigoroussteve.com/shop. Looking for personalized advice, I'm always available for consultations. You can find the consultation rates in the consultations section. Contact me directly through the contact form if you're interested. Follow me on Instagram at VigorSteve. Vigorous crew, you guys know what to do. Front double bicep for you guys. No esters in these cannons. But at one point the esters will return and these cannons are going to look a little bit more impressive. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you in the next video.